blackthorn separated the manager's house and garden from the park with its lawns and artificial lakes which surrounded the main house. As Ivan Ivanovich and Nikolai Nikolaevich skirted the hedge, small flocks of sparrows flew out at regular intervals. The blackthorn swarmed with them, and their even chatter accompanied them like water flowing in a pipe. They passed the hothouses, the gardener's cottage, and the ruins of some stone structure. They were talking about new talent in science and literature. Yes, there are gifted men, said Nikolai Nikolaevich. But the fashion nowadays is all for groups and societies of every sort. Gregariousness is always the refuge of mediocrities, whether they swear by Soloviev or Kant or Marx. Only individuals seek the truth, and they shun those whose sole concern is not the truth. How many things in the world deserve our loyalty? Very few indeed. I think one should be loyal to immortality, which is another word for life, a stronger word for it. One must be true to immortality, true to Christ. Ah, you're turning up your nose, my poor man. As usual, you haven't understood a thing. Said Ivan Ivanovich. Thin, fair-haired, restless as an eel, he had a mocking little beard that made him look like an American of Lincoln's time. He was always bunching it up in his hand and nibbling the tip. I say nothing, of course. As you know, I look at these things rather differently. But while we're at it, tell me, what was it like when they unfrocked you? I bet you were scared. They didn't anathematize you, did they? You're trying to change the subject. However, why not? Anathematize me? No. They don't do that anymore. It was unpleasant, and there are certain consequences. For instance, one is banned from the civil service for quite a long time, and I was forbidden to go to Moscow or Petersburg. But these are trifles. As I was saying, one must be true to Christ. I'll explain. What you don't understand is that it is possible to be an atheist. It is possible not to know whether God exists, or why, and yet believe that man does not live in a state of nature but in history, and that history as we know it now began with Christ, and that Christ's gospel is its foundation. Now what is history? It is the centuries of systematic explorations of the riddle of death, with a view to overcoming death. That's why people discover mathematical infinity and electromagnetic waves, that's why they write symphonies. Now, you can't advance in this direction without a certain faith. You can't make such discoveries without spiritual equipment. And the basic elements of this equipment are in the Gospels. What are they? To begin with, love of one's neighbor, which is the supreme form of vital energy. Once it fills the heart of man, it has to overflow and spend itself. And then the two basic ideals of modern man, without them he is unthinkable: the idea of free personality and the idea of life as sacrifice. Mind you, all this is still extraordinarily new. There was no history in this sense among the ancients. They had blood and beastliness and cruelty and pockmarked Caligulas who do not suspect how untalented every enslaver is. They had the boastful dead eternity of bronze monuments and marble columns. It was not until after the coming of Christ that time and man could breathe freely. It was not until after him that men began to live toward the future. Man does not die in a ditch like a dog, but at home in history, while the work toward the conquest of death is in full swing. He dies sharing in this work. Oof. I got quite worked up, didn't I? But I might as well be talking to a blank wall. That's metaphysics, my dear fellow. It's forbidden by my doctors, my stomach won't take it. Oh well, you're hopeless. Let's leave it. Goodness. What of you, you lucky devil? Though I suppose as you live with it every day you don't see it. It was hard to keep one's eyes on the shimmering river, which, like a sheet of polished metal, reflected the glare of the sun. Suddenly its surface parted in waves. A big ferry loaded with carts, horses, and peasants and their women started for the other shore. Just think, it's only a little after 5, said Ivan Ivanovich. There's the express from Sizran. It passes here at 5 past 5. Far out on the plain, crossing it from right to left, came a neat little yellow and blue train, tiny in the distance. Suddenly they noticed that it had stopped. White puffs of steam flurried over the engine, and then came a prolonged whistle. That's strange, said Voskoboinikov. Something's wrong. It has no business to stop in the middle of the marsh out there. Something must have happened. Let's go and have tea. Nika was neither in the garden nor in the house. Yura guessed that he was hiding because they bored him, and because Yura was too young for him. When his uncle and Ivan Ivanovich went on the veranda to work, Yura was left to wander aimlessly about the grounds. How enchanting this place was! Orioles kept making their clear 3-note calls, stopping each time just long enough to let the countryside suck in the moist fluting sounds down to the last vibration. A heavy fragrance, motionless, as though having lost its way in the air, was fixed by the heat above the flower beds. This brought back memories of Antibes and Bordiera. Yura turned this way and that. The ghost of his mother's voice was hallucinatingly present in the meadows. He heard it in the musical phrases of the birds and the buzzing of the bees. Now and then he imagined with a start that his mother was calling him, asking him to join her somewhere. He walked to the gully and climbed from the clear coppice at its edge into the alder thicket that covered its bottom. Down there among the litter of fallen branches it was dark and dank. Flowers were few, and the notched stalks of horsetail looked like the staffs with Egyptian ornaments in his illustrated Bible. Yura felt more and more lonely. He wanted to cry. He slumped to his knees and burst into tears. Angel of God, my holy guardian, he prayed, keep me firmly on the path of truth and tell Mother I'm all right, she's not to worry. If there is a life after death, O Lord, receive Mother into your heavenly mansions where the faces of the saints and of the just shine like stars. Mother was so good, she couldn't have been a sinner, have mercy on her, Lord, and please don't let her suffer. Mother. In his heart-rending anguish he called to her as though she were another patron saint, and suddenly, unable to bear any more, fell down unconscious. He was not unconscious for long. When he came to, he heard his uncle calling him from above. He answered and began to climb. Suddenly he remembered that he had not prayed for his missing father, as Maria Nikolaevna had taught him to. But his fainting spell had left him with a sense of lightness and well-being that he was unwilling to lose. He thought that nothing terrible would happen if he prayed for his father some other time, as if saying to himself, let him wait. Yura did not remember him at all. 7 In a second-class compartment of the train sat Misha Gordon, who was traveling with his father, a lawyer from Gorenburg. Misha was a boy of 11 with a thoughtful face and big dark eyes. He was in his second year of gymnasium. His father, Grigory Osipovich Gordon, was being transferred to a new post in Moscow. His mother and sisters had gone on some time before to get their apartment ready. Father and son had been traveling for 3 days. Russia, with its fields, steppes, villages, and towns, bleached lime-white by the sun, flew past them wrapped in hot clouds of dust. Lines of carts rolled along the highways, occasionally lumbering off the road to cross the tracks. From the furiously speeding train it seemed that the carts stood still and the horses were marking time. At big stations passengers jumped out and ran to the buffet. The sun setting behind the station garden lit their feet and shone under the wheels of the train. Every motion in the world taken separately was calculated and purposeful, but, taken together, they were spontaneously intoxicated with the general stream of life which united them all. People worked and struggled, each set in motion by the mechanism of his own cares. But the mechanisms would not have worked properly had they not been regulated and governed by a higher sense of an ultimate freedom from care. This freedom came from the feeling that all human lives were interrelated. A certainty that they flowed into each other, a happy feeling that all events took place not only on the earth in which the dead are buried, but also in some other region which some called the kingdom of God, others history, and still others by some other name. To this general rule Misha was an unhappy, bitter exception. A feeling of care remained his ultimate mainspring and was not relieved and ennobled by a sense of security. He knew this hereditary trait in himself and watched morbidly and self-consciously for symptoms of it in himself. It distressed him. Its presence humiliated him. For as long as he could remember he had never ceased to wonder why. Having arms and legs like everyone else, and a language and way of life common to all, one could be different from the others, liked only by few and, moreover, loved by no one. He could not understand a situation in which if you were worse than other people you could not make an effort to improve yourself. What did it mean to be a Jew? What was the purpose of it? What was the reward or the justification of this impotent challenge, which brought nothing but grief? When Misha took the problem to his father he was told that his premises were absurd, and that such reasonings were wrong, but he was offered no solution deep enough to attract him or to make him bow silently to the inevitable. And making an exception only for his parents, he gradually became contemptuous of all grown-ups who had made this mess and were unable to clear it up. He was sure that when he was big he would straighten it all out. Now, for instance, no one had the courage to say that his father should not have run after that madman when he had rushed out onto the platform, and should not have stopped the train when, pushing Grigory Osipovich aside, and flinging open the door, he had thrown himself head-first out of the express like a diver from a springboard into a swimming pool. But since it was his father who had pulled the emergency release, it looked as if the train had stopped for such an inexplicably long time because of them. No one knew the exact cause of the delay. Some said that the sudden stop had damaged the air brakes, others that they were on a steep gradient and one engine could not make it. A third view was that as the suicide was a prominent person, his lawyer, who had been with him on the train, insisted on officials being called from the nearest station, Kologrivivka, to draw up a statement. This was why the assistant engineer had climbed up the telegraph pole. The inspection handcar must be on its way. There was a faint stench from the lavatories, not quite dispelled by eau de cologne, and a smell of fried chicken, a little high and wrapped in dirty wax paper. As though nothing had happened. Graying Petersburg ladies with creaking chesty voices, turned into gypsies by the combination of soot and cosmetics, powdered their faces and wiped their fingers on their handkerchiefs when they passed the door of the Gordons' compartment, adjusting their shawls and anxious about their appearance even while squeezing themselves through the narrow corridor. Their pursed lips seemed to Misha to hiss. "Aren't we sensitive? We're something special. We're intellectuals. It's too much for us." The body of the suicide lay on the grass by the embankment. A little stream of blood had run across his forehead, and, having dried, it looked like a cancel mark crossing out his face. It did not look like his blood, which had come from his body, but like a foreign appendage, a piece of plaster or a splatter of mud or a wet birch leaf. Curious onlookers and sympathizers surrounded the body in a constantly changing cluster. While his friend and traveling companion, a thick-set, arrogant-looking lawyer, a purebred animal in a sweaty shirt, stood over him sullenly with an expressionless face. Overcome by the heat, he was fanning himself with his hat. In answer to all questions he shrugged his shoulders and said crossly without even turning around, he was an alcoholic. Can't you understand? He did it in a fit of D.T.S. Once or twice a thin old woman in a woolen dress and lace kerchief went up to the body. She was the widow Tivazina, mother of 2 engineers, who was traveling third class on a pass with her 2 daughters-in-law. Like nuns with their mother superior, the 2 quiet women, their shawls pulled low over their foreheads, followed her in silence. The crowd made way for them. Tivizina's husband had been burned alive in a railway accident. She stood a little away from the body, where she could see it through the crowd, and sighed as if comparing the two cases. Each according to his fate, she seemed to say. Some die by the Lord's will, and look what's happened to him, to die of rich living and mental illness.